Hey, this is Greg Galant. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Muck. I'm really excited to be able to welcome you all here for a very special Muck Live. Our topic today is politics, polarization, and purpose. I think we all know this year, 2021, hasn't been off to the smooth, calm start many had hoped for, but we all know this is the topic that is top of mind for every communicator, I think for every CEO of a large organization and leader of really any organization. It's what do we do about this new landscape we're facing, and also top of mind for journalists, which is why we're really excited to have a great group to talk through it with. But before I introduce them, I want to invite all of you to ask your questions. We know people are viewing this. We're broadcasting it out to Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, every platform. But the great news is whatever platform you're using, you can ask us questions, hashtag MuckRackLive, and I'll be monitoring those questions and asking them of our guests. So please send your questions in. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Let's start off with Carrie Budoff of Politico.
Hi, thanks, Greg. I appreciate being here. It's great to be here. I'm glad. I'll do an introduction maybe after Fred, but maybe not, and I'll just say now. I am the editor of Politico, and I oversee a newsroom here of almost 300 journalists across this country in Washington and more than a dozen states. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Carrie, and I look forward to getting your take on this research. We're really excited that USC is sharing this research with us, and this is an exclusive first look at this new research. We're really excited to have Fred Cook from USC Annenberg. Fred, can you please introduce yourself and then kick off the findings?
Sure, Greg. Thank you very much for having me, and hi, Carrie. Nice to see you. I am also as of today, I'm the chairman emeritus of Galant, a public relations firm, where I've been for a long time. And I'm also the director of the Center for Public Relations at USC Annenberg in LA. And at our center, we study the future of PR and media to better understand how communications can solve some of society's biggest problems. And with that in mind, we did a survey just a few weeks ago to determine the impact of the recent presidential election on journalism, public relations, and a whole bunch of other topics. And I want to share the results of that with you today because nobody's seen these before. And the first thing I wanted to talk about just briefly on the next slide is credibility. That's clearly something that everybody is talking about, and it was a subject in our survey. Only 2/3 of the people we surveyed, 1,000 Americans, felt that the elections was totally credible. In fact, 16% of the people we surveyed, and this was 1 month after the election, before the Electoral College vote, still believed that President Trump would be president on Inauguration Day. So there's a lot of question about what's true and what isn't, and that impacts the government, it impacts business, and it impacts the media for sure. But the biggest finding is on the next slide, and that is under the topic of polarization. We asked people on a lot of topics what would stay the same or what would increase or decrease. And we did in 3 separate surveys that we combined, the general public, journalists, and PR professionals all agreed that the level of polarization that we're experiencing in our country right now is going to stay the same or increase. And that I found to be slightly depressing news, but as we can see in terms of what's happening in the world today, that it is absolutely a fact that despite the calls for President-elect Biden's calls for unity, there doesn't seem to be a lot of that happening at this point in time.
So, Carrie, let me ask you, you oversee hundreds of journalists. Like, what does this mean for just the day-to-day jobs of journalists, and how have you seen it change, journalists having to operate in this environment today versus the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I have watched this evolve. I've had a front row seat to this. I spent 2015 and 16 actually in Europe, helping set up our Europe operations. So I sort of missed that big that big 2-year period where we really saw things accelerate, and came back to America, right before the 2016 election, and took over the newsroom right afterwards. And looking back on these past 4 years, I think, what happened last week at the Capitol was the clearest manifestation for my newsroom, the product of the polarization, frankly. We've seen it in so many ways, until now. And yet, sort of the events of last week have really sort of reshaped, I think, the way a lot of, newsroom leaders are looking at what led up to that, and how much the media ecosystem, the polarization, the balkanization, fracturing of the media environment, how much that led to the events of last year and what role we all play in it. And so I think, this topic is so timely because it really is such a important, foremost question as we, as administrations change, as you have a president, as you said, who's coming in, who's trying to change the rhetoric and change behavior. And I think what's clear to all of us, no matter where you are and what side of the aisle or what your job is that, and as the survey shows, it's a really tall order to sort of unwind where we are right now as a country. And journalists, and all of us in PR, journalists are on the front lines of dealing with that information warfare, which really is the case. So my sort of position, I felt coming into this, and I'll wrap and turn it over in a second, but, I was asked this question a lot early in my tenure as editor, which is that, what are you going to do about the fact that there are so many readers, or there's an audience out there that won't listen or pay heed to facts, or sort of go outside their own bubble? And that's it was a really big question for me to take on early in my tenure, that the only answer I sort of came to over a period of time is that, I know what I can control. And that is a newsroom of multiple, journalists whose main mission is to hold people in power to account, to write about, politics and policy, and bring fact-based reporting to the world. And that is how I can control it, by maintaining that mission and vision, and editorial, focus that we have at Politico. And now I'm coming out of this 4-year period, and obviously we saw what happened last year, and I think we're all sort of re-examining where we are in this media landscape, and it's a foremost challenge for me and for my peers across the industry, for sure.
Fred, you've in your role as leading a large PR firm, I'm sure you've advised countless CEOs and PR teams, and I think it's been such a shift for organizations where it used to be they'd want to stay away from politics and just talk about their product and have messages that appeal to everybody. And it seems like there's been a huge shift now. Everyone's looking to CEOs for statements on political issues. So I don't want to jump too far ahead, because I know we have you have a lot more findings that will be relevant to this too. But just seeing that level of polarization that the PR teams are acknowledging too, what do you think this new environment means, and how are you seeing it manifest itself in terms of what corporations and PR teams have to think about?
We have a couple of slides coming up, Greg, that address that specifically. So let me walk through these consumer ones, and then we'll get to what the impact on business, because it has a huge impact on the public relations field and on business. But
sounds great.
On the next slide, it shows the polarization. And also, we asked people about the level of cooperation in Congress. And as you can see, that they don't expect much there. They don't see a lot of improvement in there. But there is some good news. People think there's going to be more access to healthcare. They think the election is going to improve the economy and the stock market. But on issues like racism, Most people think racism is going to stay the same, and many think that it's going to increase. So we have two sides of the coin, good for the economy, maybe bad for some of the values. And then we ask ourselves, why is that? And I think that if you look at this next chart on impact on people's beliefs, you can see that the majority of people are going to stay the same. The top two things show that their commitment to change and their engagement in the political process are going to be, they're going to increase that. So people are engaged. That's the good news. They're going to vote. They're going to be involved. They're going to make their opinions known. But their opinions aren't changing very much. And even in the trust in government and the faith in democracy, those numbers aren't very high. And when you look at the conservative side, they're even lower. So the trust in government and the faith in democracy, the people on the right are declining. It's improving a little bit in the people on the left. But what Carrie was talking about, if you look at empathy at different opinions, 70% of people are going to stay the same. There is not a lot of interest in other people's ideas right now. And that's why this polarization is, we're sort of stuck with it. Should we go on?
Well, let's, I'm curious there, Carrie, what's your thoughts? Like, do journalists have a role to play in this idea of empathy? Do you think they can start, that it's up to journalists to kind of help bridge that gap and make each side see the other? Or is that, is that outside of the realm and it's just more about reporting the facts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll speak to the mission at Politico, which, we are a nonpartisan news organization where, we want readers and audience from, a wide swath of America. There obviously are extremes on both sides that aren't ever going to find, journalism like mine or Bloomberg or others, but their cup of tea. But there is this sort of very big, broad, preponderance of Americans who we want to think that, there is a place to provide fact-based, independent reporting that can be trusted. And part of that mission is also, to, make sure that different opinions are heard, or that there are conversations around that. So, maybe these worlds, so we can hold back this sort of, what we see is this sort of increasing, lanes that people stay in to consume their information. And that is a concern of mine as we move forward as a country, maintaining a role for, journalism that I spent 2 years in Europe, and the media environment in Europe is very sort of nationalistic, based on, I reported in Brussels, where people would come into Brussels to report from the viewpoint of their country or their party. And we stood out there because we didn't have a party, we didn't have a country, and we were reporting on, the European Union from a, very American style sort of position of, we're here to call balls and strikes. It's not a he said, she said, or false equivalencies. We're going to report it as we see it for the good of the reader based on facts. That's the same principle that holds here. And I do think, that there is a responsibility of, those who choose to take it to sort of expose different viewpoints. Yes. But there's obviously guardrails as well. And increasingly, and as the survey shows, that's also difficult to, that is also not always welcomed, obviously, among audiences. And there's blowback for that. And that's just a reality of the moment we're in. But those organizations like my own who have a mission about, nonpartisan journalism, like, we're gonna continue to abide by that and hope that we can continue to draw audiences that are not just left, are not just right or center, that we can sort of draw in people from different viewpoints and worldviews.
And the next slide emphasizes that we asked journalists, this one was both journalists and PR people. And it's generally, people believe it's really good. The change in leadership is going to be very good globally for a lot of different factors, from trade to the reputation of the United States. All kinds of things are going to improve based on this transition. So that's very positive news, and everybody seems to agree on that. But when we looked at the media, it was a very interesting, I think, very interesting slide. If you look at the next one, Greg. A couple of things. In the areas where we saw journalists thinking there would be a decrease, they think that consumers may decrease the amount of news they consume now that Trump is not going to be in the spotlight, and that the amount of news dedicated to politics may also decrease for the very same reasons. But they also predict, on the other side of the coin, that there's going to be an increase, or fake news will either stay the same or increase, as well as the proliferation of conspiracy theories. So there may be a decline in the consumption of traditional media and an increase in the consumption of fake news, which is a very troubling dynamic. And the one thing I want to point out on here in terms of credibility, this was the most outstanding result we saw. The most dramatic one is the 80% of journalists said the credibility of the White House communications team was going to improve. And that's going to change a lot of the dynamics around everything that has to do with public relations and with media. So I think we're seeing a lot of changes in the future. People think the social media is going to be continued to be politicized, and that will likely lead to more regulation of social media platforms. But we're seeing those platforms right now regulating themselves. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to the media in the coming years, and whether, Carrie, the question is whether the coverage is going to be more balanced, or if we're going to continue to see these silos of information.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much interesting to dissect, honestly, on this slide. I mean, I can just sort of tell you my experience since the election at Politico. I mean, there's been no slowdown in interest, and it remains at this sort of extraordinarily high level of readership, viewership, the business, everything. There is such a hunger to understand what is going on now. That is obviously, it's the tail end of the Trump presidency. It's been incredibly controversial and packed with just, sort of wild events. And I think the question, which is, is spoken to here on this slide, is like, what happens on January 20th? And how, and what do we see in terms of the consumption of media? How do we evolve? How do we handle a post-presidency of Trump's? These are all very front of mind issues that I'm grappling with. But I think the amount of news dedicated to politics, like the mission of my publication is to cover politics and policy. And one of the things I said early in the Trump years, when we were being called enemy of the people, when Sean Spicer was going after my reporters from the podium in the White House by name and by outlet, I would say, to them, and I firmly believed it then, and it has come true, which is that we will be here long after a Trump presidency, whether it's 1 term or 2 terms. Politico will be here. The media will be here. We'll be here longer than Sean Spicer. I mean, that is indeed the case. There is that is a fact. And yet, where we are now, we will, as an institution, define whether Trump is in office or he's not because of our mission, because we cover government and how it operates. And there's going to be this incredibly important story moving forward that will drive and invigorate my newsroom. And I know many of my peers across the industry that even if sort of you don't have this sort of mass audience of people who are watching because they have to, my work is the same, is the same on January 20th as it is today, as it was 4 years ago before Trump was elected. And the importance of what we do remains the same. And frankly, if our audience, decreases because we don't have Trump, like my business model is not based on whether that's the case or not. My business model incentivizes good journalism, evidence-based journalism, whether it's Trump in charge or whether it's Biden in charge. So I feel very grateful to be at Politico for that reason, because we don't have a business model based on clicks or sort of that mass audience. And yet that mass audience has come, and that's been great, and we've tried to grab onto them. But, post Trump, I do think there will be a decrease that will impact some people differently. I know where we are as a publication, and as much as this Trump years have been just sort of this incredible moment for the media, there is a sort of new storyline we're moving into that will still be incredibly important to people. COVID, economy, just how this president operates, and the race for 2024 is on. I mean, let's be honest, and that interest is going to be incredible. So, that's the way I see it. And I think, I remain as curious and interested as everybody else to see what this sort of post-Trump environment looks like for the media, and how it's all handled. But, I know where we are as a publication, I feel pretty good about that.
Not to diverge too much, but Carrie, can you just tell us in a quick bit about how the Politico business model works? And then I think there's this general narrative that hey, the time to be nonpartisan's over. Either you have to be right wing or left wing, and that's where the money is. That's where the audience is. Yeah. So how can what is the case for how a news organization can chart the course being nonpartisan and not contributing to the kind of bifurcation?
Yeah, I mean, our business model, we have a premium subscription service that accounts for roughly half of our revenue. These are subscribers who pay thousands of dollars to get our content. They tend to be in the professional world, people who have a professional need to consume information at a very granular level about what is going on across multiple sectors of the economy. They need this information to do their jobs in news, information, and other tools. That has always been sort of our secret sauce, the fact that we built a subscription service a decade ago that has grown considerably. On top of it, we've seen tremendous growth on our digital advertising side. And again, catering though, or not targeting sort of a specific type of advocacy advertiser that remains, very sort of willing to align with journalism that can be trusted and that they want to be around. So that's a big part of our revenue model as well. And it's not based on clicks, right? Like I was saying, our traffic is so much higher than it was 4 years ago, 2 years ago, a month ago. And yet it remains a part of our business model that if it were to sort of decrease or cut in half tomorrow, our business would not collapse, because we have this loyal subscriber base and a digital advertising infrastructure that incentivizes journalism that can be trusted and is fact-based. And so that nonpartisanship, again, does not mean that we don't call balls and strikes. It doesn't mean we do on one side, on the other. There are plenty of stories you would see on my site right now that would make, people from across the spectrum, irritated. But we are incentivized, and we do see a future for nonpartisan journalism, in part because so many others have pulled away from that sphere. Right. And so we see a place to go there. And yet it also remains a source of intense discussion, within so many newsrooms about what that actually means. And I just come back to the fact that we report on facts, we get information and we hold power to account. And that is our role. And I think when you stay focused on that mission, we move forward along there. So I believe deeply in the model of nonpartisan journalism. That's the world I grew up in. I was a newspaper reporter who reported on town halls in South Jersey and went face to face with a town manager every day and had to defend what I did. That's the world I came up in. I also know the world is evolving, and we all have to evolve as leaders, as publications, and yet that core principle I remain very committed to. And frankly, it has done well for our business, because we are twice the size of what we were when I took over this publication 4 years ago. So that just shows you there is a market for information that people can trust, and that's a trust that I have to protect.
Congratulations on the growth. Let me take a question we got in from Facebook from Andres. Doesn't the drastic increase in credibility of the White House comms team show a glimpse into an inherent bias in the current administration, and against the idea that reporters are nonpartisan. So I'll open up to either of you, but kind of how do you reconcile this idea that
I can help answer that, Greg. We did a survey a few years ago and asked the PR profession about the credibility and the professionalism of the team that Sean Spicer was leading. And it wasn't a question of their politics. It was more a question of their professionalism. And they got very poor rankings from their colleagues in the PR industry. And many said that they would not hire them once they left the White House, which is a big change from previous administrations where the people that did communications for them were very respected and went on to big careers in communications. We didn't see the same thing happening. And it wasn't because people disagreed with their opinion. It was they disagreed with the way they approached their work.
If I could just jump on there, I mean, this was clear from the first day that Sean Spicer went to the podium. I mean, and has just obviously only gotten worse since then. And what I always struggled with as a newsroom leader is like, I covered the White House. I covered the Obama White House for 6 years. And obviously I've been a reporter for 20 years. And when you can't trust, when you're lied to repeatedly, that is a cardinal sin in the business, right? It's like Fred knows that. You don't lie. We were lied to repeatedly and brazenly. And frankly, that's the issue. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, you don't lie. Do not lie to journalists. It will never work out well for you. And so that is the bias that we have, is to the truth, and being upfront and using that position appropriately. And I'm probably saying more than I should, but that is the facts, right? The facts are that we were lied to repeatedly. You don't do that with journalists.
Good advice. And Fred, I know we have a lot more research to get to, so excited to see the next findings.
All right. I'll just say we also talked to PR professionals. They feel that this change in the administration is going to be positive for our business. Diversity, and you can see it happening in the Biden cabinet. I think this idea of diversity of opinion and diversity of ethnic diversity is going to be much more focused in the communications industry. And I also believe that we're seeing from the survey that public relations is going to grow in terms of its comparison to advertising. I think advertised messages are not going to be as powerful as stories being told in real time by PR people, because of the nature, and you'll see this on the next slide if you go to it, Greg, of the impact on business. We wondered whether, with Trump out of the office, whether activists were going to just take a vacation. And it turns out they're not. The public relations people predict that activists, employees, and consumers are all going to expect more from business than they ever have before. And there's going to be more of a focus on the values and the practices of business, and the CEOs and how they're conducting themselves. So I think that this level of intense scrutiny about what's happening in the business world is going to grow, and people are going to be looking for them to play a bigger role in society than ever before. So that puts communications in the front and center on a lot of the issues that society is dealing with, and business is going to have to play a role in that, and we see that very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, actually, we have a question that maybe I'll pull this one up and let Carrie and Fred address, from Michelle Garrett, who's a frequent contributor to Muck. Fascinating insights here. How will the transition to the new leadership impact the relationship between journalists and PR pros? And I guess to frame it with this, like, everyone, we're gonna want to hear more from CEOs. That means more work between the journalists and PR pros. It's always a promising but fraught relationship. But how's that going to evolve?
Michelle is prescient, because our very last slide in this deck answers that question. And we asked people whether the mutual respect between these two professions would stay the same or increase. Many said it would stay the same, but 39% of PR professionals thought the mutual respect would increase, and 37% of journalists thought it would increase. So I think we're going to see, and I think it's appropriate, because these sort of problems that we're facing with credibility and polarization, we're all going to have to work together to solve these. And I think that the respect and the cooperation between our two professions is going to have to increase. And so, Michelle, I think we're going to see a really positive move in that direction. And I'm looking forward to that.
Do you agree, Carrie, speaking from the journalist perspective?
I think we have, returning to a place where like truth and transparency, or just like adherence to facts will do wonders for all of us. A common set of facts, it is.
And do you think, kind of going off the last slide, do you see continuing to, I think there was a thought maybe that people wanted to hear from CEOs more about political issues when the White House wasn't taking a stance on them. So with the new administration, do you think that people will still want to hear from CEOs on political issues? Is that a trend, or is that just an anomaly for 4 years?
It looks like a trend to us. If you look at I think it's the next slide. This is the PR professionals are talking about how they're going to respond to this increase in scrutiny. And I think that they're going to be more focusing on diversity, like we talked about before, and developing more purpose-driven campaigns. Instead of talking about their products and their services, they're going to be talking about their purpose and their values. And that plays into the CEO's responsibility in a big way. So I think whether they want to or not, CEOs are going to have to take a stand on more and more issues that may be outside of their comfort zone. We saw it this summer with Black Lives Matter, and I think that trend is going to continue.
Yeah, I think we're all seeing it in our workplaces, and I think what could shift slightly is obviously you're not going to have the added element of a president in the White House who is sort of bringing up issues that is really sort of forcing a lot of these very, very tough conversations. Biden is going to be a different president, and by virtue of everything he says, he's going to try to bring the temperature down. But I think Fred is right in that the workforce is evolving and changing in wonderful ways that also pose challenges for leaders of different generations, where the workforce that I came up in under 20 years ago is vastly different, thank goodness, than the one I came up under, right? That is a good thing. And that also poses a challenge to all of us as leaders to understand that and evolve with that. And that is the challenge I find in this environment. Take it on as it's a challenge. It's a challenge that is is forcing people of all kinds in leadership positions to really look hard and grapple with our evolving workforce. And and there's so much good that comes from that.
Yeah, I think it's something we all struggle with, and we've had the same in our organization. I even found it surprising. We're about 100-person company that, and I think not long ago, people wouldn't have had those expectations. We found very much our team did. So, as everyone's trying to figure this out, I'm curious from both of you, like, what resources do you use, and, be it serving on the PR team side, or who do you talk to? Like, how do you go about formulating these policy positions that your company needs to take? And it seems like you have to do it in real time, that something comes up you never thought about before as a company. Maybe you did as an individual, and the team expects an announcement tomorrow in an hour.
If you go to the next slide, it shows the issues that PR people think will be topical for this under the Biden administration. And you can see climate change, racial equity, police reform, affordable healthcare. These are tough issues. And these are the kinds of things that people are going to be talking about, both on the left and on the right. And these are ones that corporations have not always been happy to join in the fray on, because they're so polarizing, and they worry about offending their customers or half of their customer base or their employees. So, but I think employees are going to be demanding to know how their company feels about these issues, even if the company doesn't want to speak about them. And there's a whole long list of issues that have this same sort of controversial potential for polarization. And the next slide shows which ones companies are most comfortable talking about. And if you see on the left, they're sort of workplace issues. They're more comfortable talking about things that happen in the workplace, about equality and rights and things like that. Climate change and other things are a little less in their comfort zone. And you can see that more than 20% don't want to talk about anything. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic moving forward. And I think the corporate communications people are at the forefront of this and trying to deal with these issues that come in left and right from their employees and from activist groups and consumers, and trying to decide which ones to speak out about, which ones to invest time and energy in. And a lot of companies are building their reputation on how they handle these purpose-oriented issues. You look at Ben & Jerry's. I mean, they're probably on the forefront of this, but their entire business model is built on being a purpose-driven company that deals with these hard issues. And we're going to see more of that.
Do you think it's going to be tenable to stay in that 20%? Because that does include a lot of Fortune 500 companies that, you know, I've talked to a number where they know their customer base is spread out all over the country, and they're kind of terrified. Do you think they can stay there, that they're going to be forced to start taking making statements on all these other issues?
I think there are some that will stay there, and they're ones that don't have a big consumer brand, so they're not faced with activists and consumers, and they will just hire the types of employees that want to work for a company like that. But I think it's going to be the minority. I think most companies, regardless of their size or what they do, are going to be faced with dealing with these kind of issues, especially because their employees are going to demand it.
Yeah, is that consistent with what you're seeing, Carrie? Your reporters are always calling these companies up. Are they able to get away with no comment for much longer?
I think it's sort of aligned with Fred. I think it depends a little bit on the company, right? I think on issues of racial and gender equality, LGBTQ, the sort of the rights and the human rights of the workforce, those are issues I don't think companies can avoid, even the 20%, frankly. But it does depend on how diverse that workforce is, you know. But I think it's inevitable, and making clear that the companies value these principles, the first three right there, I think are above and beyond so many others, at least from my perspective as a media organization, right? Like, we don't, as an organization, take a position on education, climate change, all of these other things. Well, some of them, disinformation, obviously, fake news we're against, freedom of speech we're for. But I think for workforces, really those issues around equality is unavoidable. And formulating appropriate approaches is essential. It's just not going away, right? We all know that. We are a diverse nation, and the workforce is diverse, and times are changing, and companies can't avoid that.
Well, Fred, I know you have a lot of you have a few more great slides. So in the interest of time, it'd be great if you could present those, and then that'll leave us a few minutes at the end to make sense of this all.
Well, sort of the good news, Greg, was that despite all of this divisiveness and the problems we're seeing in our country right now, that there still is a lot of hope. And Americans are positive people. And overall, we saw 63% of people that we surveyed felt positive about the future. if you look at this chart, obviously the people on the left feel a little more positive than the people on the right. But I think this gives us a foundation for battling this polarization and creating more national unity. We did ask people about their willingness their desire to leave the country, because people are always talking about that. And we did see that that number decreased 37% and with the liberals, but it increased by 21% with the conservatives. So it just shows you that there's a lot of difference of opinion depending on what your political approach is to what's happening in our country. But the fact that people are optimistic gives me hope that we can find some common ground to come together. And it's interesting, women are more positive about the future than men. And I don't know why. Maybe Carrie can help us, enlighten us on that topic.
I don't know. That's a really interesting distinction. I probably have thoughts on that one, which, I mean, I think my assumption on something like women more positive about the future than men could have something to do with where they come from on the spectrum, honestly, and views in relationship probably to the leader of the country, perhaps. I'm not sure. Hard to say. Yeah. Hard to say.
And then, Greg, the final slide was just about civil unrest and what people thought. You can see from this that everybody hopes that there'll be national unity. That's the feeling. But as we've seen recently, this idea of civil unrest is very much with us. And about a quarter of the people expect there is going to be an increase in that. So that remains to be seen. But as we've already seen in the Capitol, this has the potential to be a real problem.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this reflects, obviously, sort of the people who are sort of the PR professionals and journalists who have really, who have had to confront this, obviously, very, very much so in recent weeks, if not years, right? Yeah. And that it's very hard for a lot of us who are working in this world to see how this all comes back together. It really is hard given the incentives that exist in the media, ecosystem for polarization, and for conspiracy theories and for, information that does not quell, but it incites. And so, we're on the front lines of that, not to take a word that should be reserved, frankly, for essential workers who are health workers and others. But we are on the front lines of seeing how this has, what is going on. And I think we all are deeply concerned about that. And 35% is actually high, in my view, for journalists to think that.
And the last point, Greg, was what I said before, is that this is something that we're going to all have to work together on. Business, government, media, if we're going to solve this problem, because I think this polarization is a serious situation and one that is not productive for our country or for us as individuals. And we've got to figure out a way to bring people back together and have them appreciate one another's and each other's opinions a little bit more. And it puts communications and media at the forefront of everything. This is a communications problem, and it's one that I think can be solved if we all put our minds together and work on it.
Great. Thank you, Fred, and really appreciate you and USC Annenberg sharing this exclusive, this research with us and giving us and our audience an exclusive first look. And Carrie, before I thank you, I just want to give you an opportunity, if you have any kind of, closing thoughts on with all this, like what's the role of journalists and journalism in the new environment that we have to come this year?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, journalists and my journalists in particular, we're going to cover this administration and this presidency through the same sort of accountability-driven lens that we've put on past presidencies. And obviously that took on heightened prominence in the past 4 years. It's always been our mission. That's what we're doing going forward. And it's probably not going to make people happy at the same time. I've already seen some of the blowback of very tough coverage on Joe Biden. And, that in and of itself is a challenge now for journalists moving forward because of, the ability to, push back on platforms that we all are on all day long. And yet I'm not going to back away from that. I know what I did under Obama, what we did under Trump, and frankly, what we're going to do going forward under a Biden administration, anybody who comes after him.
Okay, well, Carrie, I know it's every day is a busy news day, so really appreciate this hour of your time. Fred, thanks so much for sharing these wonderful insights, and congratulations to you on the new role. And thanks to everybody for tuning in for your questions. This is a regular series, so we'll have more content coming to you soon. But in the meantime, everyone, make sure you turn off your screen a little bit at the end of the day today and enjoy your weekends. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.